What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video. I just wanted to say before we get started here, I really appreciate all the support that you guys have been giving me on YouTube, on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter. It's been going a lot better than I could have hoped for. Let's just go ahead and get into it. If you just look up ball python documentary, it will be third one on the list after the ad, after the Nat Geo. The reason I wanted to talk to you guys about this, it is about ball pythons. This is the kind of information that people are putting out about the hobby that we love and care about so much. A lot of the questions within the documentary are very forced, and majority of it is just plain wrong. So there are a couple parts in this documentary that I wanted to touch on. Basically, the premise of this whole documentary is about ball pythons and the trade around them, as well as the wild collection of ball pythons. They go into how they're held captively. They go into how they are improperly taken care of. But the individuals that are
experts,
the hosts, the woman from WAP and the gentleman who is the host of the show, they essentially sit down after going to an expo, which if anyone's been to a reptile expo, those things are amazing. But they sit down at like a coffee shop or some sort of diner afterwards, and they kind of go over photos of what they've seen. And that's going to be the first thing that I respond to. I do urge you to go and watch the entire thing yourself, just to see not only how ridiculous some of the things that they say sound, but also the like to dislike ratio on this video is out of 1,933 views, 9 likes and 339 dislikes. Okay, so now they're at the diner. Let's go ahead and watch this part, and we'll go ahead and respond to that here in a second.
How stressful do you think it would be for the snakes to be under these bright lights all day, to be constantly picked up by people, to have no access to food, no access to water?
Oh, no.
It would be
No access to food or water? What?
experts.
How dare they?
extremely stressful for them to be in those kinds of conditions. These animals are not being allowed to display their instincts, their natural instincts.
Did you hear that? Their natural instincts at a reptile expo. No. I had no clue that that would be something that would happen. Duh! They don't display their natural behaviors because they're in showcases, which they're in for 3 days max. Usually they're only in them for 2, but they're in them for 2 days on average. And she's complaining that they don't display their natural instincts and behaviors and that they don't have food and water.
They aren't in any kind of natural setting that allows them to fully extend, which is what they do when they eat.
I love how she says
them
that.
To
okay,
explore.
So they're not allowed to fully extend, which is what they do when they eat. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't think this lady has ever seen a snake eat. Because those of us in the community know that snakes don't have to be fully extended when they eat. Majority of the time, they're coiled around the prey in ball pythons anyway. They're coiled around the prey when they eat, and then they swallow it. And the only thing that straightens out is the part where the prey item is. Every other part of the snake could be completely coiled up, and it's fine. Some of my snakes will even eat in their hides. Like, they'll never even come out of their hides. They'll strike the rat, they'll take it, and then they'll pull it into their hide while they're coiled up, and eat it. But they're not allowed to display their natural behaviors
there
at a
isn't,
reptile expo.
the proper, enrichment.
What was so fascinating was just how many different types of colours and patterns there were, and that was all from one species, just ball pythons.
Experts.
Part of this industry is this desire to have the most unique, the most interesting animal that has created this cottage industry where they are, changing the genetics of these animals and breeding them to get unique colors, unique designs.
If you look in films, you look in
So-
popular culture.
They're essentially bagging on the entire breeding community right now, stating that we're changing the genetics of ball pythons by breeding them for these morphs, the different colored and pattern mutations. No, those are naturally occurring. That's not something that we're not scientists. We didn't decipher the genome of the ball python and then decide to pick out little different things to make it have a different color or a different pattern and then throw it back in an embryo and grow the snake. I don't understand why. She just seems like she doesn't know. She really doesn't. Like, zero factual information or scientific study in this documentary. For those of you who don't know much about morphs, they're found out in the wild with weird looking pattern or color. And then they get imported to the US to breeders who will purchase those oddities, we'll call them. But they get imported into the US, and then these breeders will keep those as dinker projects, or import projects, depends on what you want to call it. But they will then spend the next 1 to 2 years growing that animal up. And then in that time, they are introducing it to captivity. So it's being allowed to adjust to being in captivity. And then they breed that animal once it's to size to see if the weird pattern that they noticed in this wild animal is genetic and will cause a new morph to come about. This is how every morph in the ball python community has ever happened. And this is why, not only because ball pythons make great pets, but this is exactly why morphs are so highly sought after and why we have so many with ball pythons. They're from Africa, a country that does not ban us from importing reptiles. They are not huge when they are adults. And then not only that, but they're not the hardest snake to take care of. Like, other than feeding strikes, and granted they need humidity more so than some other snakes, they're generally a pretty easy animal to take care of. And that's pretty across the board with all snake keepers. Ball pythons are like the beginner snake. And they have all these different colors and patterns. And that's why they're so big in the community.
Snakes are always animals to be feared. Do you think that there is a perception that snakes aren't sentient beings?
I don't know who started this whole they're not sentient. I don't think anyone in the community or anyone in the hobby thinks that these animals are just stupid and dumb and they aren't intelligent in at least
To most
some
of us,
way.
they're not cute, they're not cuddly, and so we assign a different value to them. They're really like products in a box, and is that
No. Let's get one thing straight here. I already forgot her name, but you see them as products in a box. We see them as beautiful and amazing animals that deserve care and responsible owners. This nobody thinks that they're products in a box other than you.
how we want to be treating animals? And I would argue no, that it's time that we make a change and that we allow animals to live the lives they deserve.
All of the exhibitors that we
Yeah,
spoke
but
to yesterday.
to you that means that we don't keep them, period, because you think they're wildlife. They're not pets. So the change that you're looking for is that they're no longer being kept.
Including this gentleman, said that they were breeding ball pythons. But do you know anything about the import of these snakes?
There is still a very large market for wild-caught snakes. If you go online, you're able to purchase them with no problem. So they may not have been for sale yesterday when we were observing them, but it is entirely possible that the wild-caught snakes were part of that breeding process at some point.
Entirely possible that they were part of that breeding process at some point.
Experts.
Get some help. Just get some help. The next main thing that they talk about in this show or in this documentary is wild-caught ball pythons and where they come from. They ultimately end up going to Ghana. There's another small town or small village in Africa that they go to that they worship ball pythons. They see them as a deity, which I thought was amazing. That is the only part of this documentary that I like in any sense of the word. He speaks to someone in Africa, I believe. Her name is Edith. She's a wildlife campaign manager in Africa, and she's a part of the World Animal Protection, the same people who are essentially putting on this whole documentary. And she talks about how in the wild-caught population of ball pythons, typically what is supposed to happen is...
In order to export these sorts of numbers and consistently, you've got to be very organized. So what happens is that there are several ball python farms. Hunters or collectors go out in the wild and collect pregnant female pythons and bring them to the ranches. They keep them until they lay the eggs, and then the eggs hatch. All the mothers are supposed to be taken back into the wild with 10% of the babies. But as to whether that happens...
So they set up these rules to control the normal population of ball pythons, the wild populations, to make sure that they aren't over-harvested, because that can happen. It's happened in the past with different species, and we wouldn't want that to happen to ball pythons, obviously. But their rule, their government set up that if an animal is captured and gives birth in captivity and they want to export the hatchlings, the mother as well as 10% of the offspring have to go back into the wild. But whether or not they are enforcing this, I don't think that falls on the pet trade or falls on reptile keepers who enjoy keeping ball pythons. And I don't think it should either. But let's go ahead and watch this last part, and I'll give you my closing comments here.
I believe that wild animals belong in the wild. These animals are not domesticated, and there is no environment that we could create for them, even with our best intentions, even with the best care possible, that would allow them to live the life that they are naturally born to live.
See, this is what I mean right there. Right there at the end, they leave you with, it doesn't matter what we do as keepers. It doesn't matter what we do in captivity. We will never, according to her, be able to give these animals the life that they are meant to live. Even though, and this is my biggest point with this too, and it irks me, they never go into the average lifespan of a wild ball python versus the average lifespan of a captive bred and captive kept ball python. Because personally, I have he's 18 now. I have an 18-year-old ball python that we had given to us from some friends of ours, and he's doing great. And as we all know, ball pythons in captivity can live upwards of 30 to 40 years. But they never go into that. And ball pythons in the wild? Here, I'm going to go ahead and fact check myself just to be sure here real quick. Okay, so I just looked it up. The life expectancy of wild ball pythons on average is only 10 years. 10 years, that's it. And in captivity, the average is 20 to 30 years. That's a 200 to 300% increase from keeping them in the wild to keeping them in captivity. So no matter what we do, unless we neglect our animals, are we going to give them the life that they were meant to live, according to this documentary. Because the life that ball pythons are meant to live in the wild is about 10 years. And in captivity, we're keeping them alive, healthy, and thriving for 20 to 30 years. And I'd say that that's a pretty good thing. Alrighty, guys. Well, we've come to the end of it. All of my ball pythons, unfortunately, were either shedding or had just eaten, and I didn't want to have them out while they were going through that. But we'll definitely make sure that we have one out for next week's video. As you see behind me, I have updated the set a little bit. I'm not sure if any of you have heard of Displate. They are a company that essentially makes metal posters. They come in a matte or gloss finish. They look great. They even have a lot of reptile stuff. I was pleasantly surprised. I was looking through their website and didn't expect to find any reptile stuff, but they've got quite a few. Thank you for joining me today, guys. I really appreciate it. Make sure you hit subscribe, smash that like button, and come on back next week and we'll have another one out for you. Peace.